Hello guys, you are all welcome to these lectures on research methodology. Please just click on the subscribe button below so that next time when I upload other lectures on other topics, you will be notified from this channel. Okay, so we are going to be proceeding following the program as shown on the screen. We will start with an introduction. We are going to look at the types of research methodology approaches. We'll look at tips on how to choose an approach to use in your research, and finally we will look at the steps that are involved in research methodology. So on a daily basis, we usually receive or we usually acquire or obtain information from different sources such as television channels, from radio stations, from magazines, from newspapers, from the internet, and also from other individuals. We acquire information on questions such as how much is the cost of a piece of land in your locality? How much is the cost of a 43-inch television screen before you actually go to the market to buy? How much is the cost of an iPhone 11? So you want to have an idea on the information before you actually go to the market to buy. And when you ask for these questions, you actually search for answers to the respective questions. So basically, each one of us carry out research on a daily basis, might be ignorantly or actually knowing that we are doing research. So what is research methodology? We'll say research methodology is the search for answers. The next question will be how. So we search for answers through systematically collecting, analyzing, and interpreting data. So in a larger sense, research methodology is the search for answers through systematically collecting, analyzing, and interpreting data. So in research methodology, there are two words that we usually use interchangeably. That is methodology and method. But in the real sense, these two words are not exactly the same thing. Okay? So we'll try to distinguish between the two. So methodology describes how you will answer your research questions. Okay? So it describes how you will answer your research questions, while method describes what you will do to collect your data. Okay? So method describes what you will do to collect your data. In other words, methodology deals with the rationale of your research, while method deals with the tools for data collection. Okay, so in summary, method is a subset of methodology because method deals with the tools of collection of data, while methodology does not only involve the tools for collection of data, but it also involves the tools for analyzing, okay, and interpreting, for analyzing and interpreting data. Okay, now research, there are three bases for research. So in order to carry out research, firstly, there must be a problem. Okay, you cannot just carry out research for carrying sake. To carry out research, there must be a problem, and because there is a problem, you ask questions relative to these problems. Okay, and because you ask questions, you try to look for answers to those questions. So basically, research embodies these three aspects. There must be a problem, and because there's a problem, you ask questions, and because you ask questions, you have to look for answers to those questions. Now, research methodology is divided into two approaches. Okay, you can either use the quantitative approach, or you use the qualitative approach. What is there for the quantitative approach and what is there for the qualitative approach? So the quantitative approach generally involves conversion of observations into numerical data. So you do an observation and you try to convert these observations into numerical data. It usually explores questions with a set of hypotheses. So you state hypotheses and then you go to verify those hypotheses with the quantitative approach. You formulate hypotheses and test them. Okay, so before you get into the research, you actually formulate a hypothesis so that when you get into it, you actually know what you are testing for. Okay, it is characterized by scientific tools that are well designed before data is collected. So before you actually get into collecting your data, you actually know the methods and you know the data that you will be collecting in this type of approach, in the quantitative approach. So you have scientific methods that you actually use in collecting your data. So before you even get into analysis, you already know the tools that you will use and how you are going to collect your data. It is descriptive, it is comparative, and it is relationship based. What does that mean? It is descriptive because it tries to handle questions such as how much, how far, how often. Okay, it is comparative because you try to look at the similarities and differences between objects. Okay, and it is relationship based because you can use it to look at the relationship between objects. So if you have to do any research where you use description, comparison, or relationship, this is the type of approach that you should be using, the quantitative approach. Okay, it is objective. That means that it is based on facts and it is measurable. Okay, in other words, before you actually start collecting your data, you have an idea what your results may look like. Okay, you have an idea what your results may look like because it is based on facts and it is measurable. Okay, measurable using scientific tools and what have you. It also requires a large number of subjects. So with this, it is something like being new. So you have to use a large number of subjects in order to say or tell the public that what you are quantifying is actually true. Okay, so this type of approach needs a large number of subjects. So the qualitative approach, generally, this approach involves description and interpretation of observations. So we see that this is opposite to the quantitative approach that tries to convert observations to numerical data. With the qualitative approach, it tries to describe and interpret the observations the way they are. Okay, it explores questions with no set hypothesis beforehand. Okay, because your results that you obtain or the data that you obtain, the results are not very clear to you, so it is difficult for you to set a hypothesis beforehand. Okay, so it explores questions with no set hypothesis beforehand. It develops ideas through induction from the data. So it's when you are actually doing your data analysis that your ideas begin to become clear to you. At the beginning, these ideas are not very clear. Okay, it is naturalistic and it is emergent. Okay, naturalistic, that means that it tries to handle life situations as they unfold. And it is emergent, that means that the researcher has the room to modify the research questions as the research is unfolding or as the research is emerging. Okay? It is subjective. That means that it is based on feelings and it is not measurable. Okay? It is based on feelings and it is not measurable. That means, in other words, that at the beginning, you do not actually have an idea of what your, your, your research results may look like. Okay, it is when you start analyzing the data that you actually develop your discussion ideas. Okay, so at the beginning, the idea is not very, the results are not very clear. It's when you start analyzing that you actually develop your ideas for discussion, which is unlike for quantitative approach that is objective. At the beginning, you might already have an idea of what your results may look like. And for this, it requires a detailed analysis of a small number of subjects, not like for the quantitative that requires a large number of subjects. Okay, so you require a detailed analysis, but for a small number of subjects. The question remains, which approach, how do we know which approach to use? Okay, in this slide, we are going to be looking at tips for choosing an approach. Now, the main basis for choosing an approach lies on the research question. So the research question is very important to give you an idea on what approach to use. So when choosing an approach, these are the things that you should consider. Firstly, what data type will enable you answer your research question? So which data type are you going to be using in your research? Okay, so how will you want the result to be presented? So you should also have an idea how you want your result to be presented, because these two are very important. Now, in a case, if both of your parameters to be measured are quantitative, okay, that means that the quantitative approach is the most preferable in this situation. Okay, or if you want to look at relationships, comparisons, and correlations, the quantitative approach will be the most preferable. Okay, but on the contrary, if both of your parameters to be measured are qualitative, okay, then you have to use the qualitative approach. Okay, or if one of the parameters is qualitative and the other is quantitative, then still you will still have to use the qualitative approach. Okay, also if you want to do exploratory study to understand the experience and behavior of people, then the qualitative approach will be preferable. Okay, so these are some of the tips that can help you know which approach to apply in your research. So let's look at these two examples of research questions. The first one is for the qualitative approach. Okay, let's take this first question, research question. My mouse is misbehaving. Does gender influence the transmission of mother to child transmission of HIV? That is a research question. Okay, so what are the parameters that we will have to measure here? We see that we'll have to measure gender. Okay, I'll also have to measure the HIV status, okay, the HIV status, the HIV status of the mothers, HIV status. We'll have to measure gender, the first parameter, gender, and we'll have to measure HIV status of mothers and children. When we look at these two parameters, gender and HIV status, we'll notice here that they are both qualitative. Okay, they are both qualitative. Gender, we will not measure it. We know that it is either male, or female. Okay, it's either male or female. And for HIV status, it is either positive or it is negative. Okay, so we cannot measure it that this person has 1 or 2 HIV status, 3 HIV status, 4 HIV status. No, it resonates between two states. Either you are positive or you are negative. As well as for gender, either you are male or you are female. So these are both qualitative data. Okay, so from this can easily tell us that for such a research question, we'll have to use the qualitative approach. Okay, we'll have to use the qualitative approach. Now, let's take the second case for quantitative approach. Okay, the quantitative approach. This is the research question. Is the growth rate of plant influenced by the quantity of rainfall? Okay, so we see here that we have the parameters we'll be measuring is growth rate, and quantity of rainfall. These both parameters are measurable. Okay, we can measure the growth rate of plantains by measuring the height of the stem of the plantain plant as it is growing up with time. Okay, and then we can also measure the quantity of rainfall. So these are both quantitative parameters. Okay, they are both quantitative parameters. And since we said in one of our tips, if both parameters are quantitative, then we will have to use the quantitative approach. Okay, so we'll look at the steps that are involved in research methodology. In research methodology, you will have, firstly, you must identify a problem. Okay, you must identify a research problem. You don't just carry out research for carrying sake. Okay, after you identify a problem, you have to do a literature review. After you do a literature review, you have to state the purpose or the objective of your study. After you should have done that, you have to collect data. After collecting data, you have to analyze and interpret the data. And after that, you have to report and evaluate the research. Okay? So these are the main steps that are involved in research methodology. We are going to look at them, taking one at identifying a research problem. Okay? You must identify a problem, okay, in order to carry out a research. You do not just carry out a research for carrying sake. There must be an issue, a problem that you should have identified in order to carry out a research. If we take the example that we had in the introduction, that you are asking a research question, how much is the cost of a piece of land in your locality? Okay, the problem that you can identify there is that what? The problem is that you do not know the price of a piece of land in your locality, and that may be due to the fact that there is no database in your area that gives you the prices or the standard prices of a piece of land in your locality. So That is a problem that you should have identified, and then you can go ahead to look for answers or solution to resolve that problem. You do not go to look for solutions if you do not have a problem, and you do not go to look for answers if you do not have a question. Okay, and identifying your research problem. Your research problem will serve as a justification, okay, for you to carry out your research work. Okay, so the problem serves as a justification for you to carry out your research work. Nobody will be willing to finance or fund a project that is centered to solve no problem. Okay, it will be impossible. That will be like a waste of funds for nothing. So the problem is a justification for you carrying out your research work. And one thing we should also note is that the research problem must be stated in the introduction part of your project. Okay, it should be stated in the introduction so that when someone is reading the introduction, he will be able to identify or see the justification why that research work or that piece of research project is necessary. So the second one, you have to do a literature review. Okay, literature review means looking at what other authors have already done in the in your topic. Okay, you are trying to look at what other authors have already published on your topic. Okay, so you might identify a problem, quite all right. Okay, but now in doing your literature review, you notice that other authors had already worked on this topic and they already gave a solution to this problem. In that case, you just have to use the solution of these authors. Okay, but then you could still do a literature review and notice that other authors have worked in or on this topic, but they still have limits in their study. Okay, there are still limits or gaps in their study. So you can still go ahead with your research in order to fill these gaps or fill the limits, okay, in this previous study. So in that case, your research work is still justifiable. It might be that these other authors worked in a different geographical locality or geographical area, okay, and you want to do this project in your own geographical area, which is totally different from that of the previous authors. You can still go ahead with your research work to see whether the result will still be the same like that of the other authors. So in that case also, your research work is justifiable. Okay, it might be that the methods that they use different methods. Previous authors use different methods in approaching the problem, and you think that your own research method will be easier and cheaper. Okay, that is still justifiable, so you can still go ahead and realize your research project. Okay, in reviewing the literature, you also try to compare the methods they use to what you may want to use in your own research work. Okay, now in doing the literature review, you also try to compare the results and conclusions obtained by other authors. Okay, this will help you have a larger idea on how to design your own project. Okay, when you do the literature review, it helps you design your own research project. Okay, now where do we get our sources to do a literature review? We can get review or our sources for literature review from textbooks, from articles, from magazines, from blog posts on the internet, okay, even from newspapers. Okay, now when you have to do your literature review, you don't just go on the internet and copy everything that you see. Okay, so you have to selectively choose which literature to include in your work, and you should also respect intellectual property. What do we mean selectively choose which literature? Most students, they go on the internet, and because they have found some information under the topic they are working on, they just copy everything they see on the net and then put it on their project. Even what does not have a link with their project, they just add it. That is not a good character, okay? You should make sure that the literature that you want to add to your project should actually be linked to the project, okay? You should actually have a link with the project. And when we say respect intellectual property, that means that if you copy somebody's idea and add into your project, you should actually give that person credit. How do you give that person credit? You give that person credit by citing the person, okay? You cite the person and then you reference it, or you add it to the reference position, okay? You add it under the references. So that is actually respecting the intellectual property. You don't just go and copy somebody's idea and come and put it on your project as if you are the author of that idea, okay? Now, after doing your literature review, you have to state your objective or state your goals, okay? And here we have two types of objectives. We have the general objective and we have the specific objectives. Have the general objective and the specific objective. The general objective is the main or overall objective of your study, okay? While the specific objectives are detailed objectives which permit you to achieve, or which will permit you to achieve or attain the general objective, okay? So the specific objective is a detailed objective that will permit you achieve your general objective. And one thing we should also note is that the general or the objectives, both the general and the specific objectives, should be mentioned, okay? They should be mentioned in the introduction section, okay? So our introduction section, we have to have a brief background. We have to have the justification, that is the problem of our project. We have to state the project of the problem of our project, justify that the research project we want to do is actually necessary, okay? And also in that introduction section, we have to state our hypothesis and our objectives, okay? So the objectives should be stated clearly also in the introduction section. Now, after you should have done this, you now get into the section for collecting your data. This involves sampling the population, that is identifying and selecting individuals for the study. So this is where you have to select which individual, which criteria should be respected for an individual to be included in your research sample group, okay? And if the person does not respect, what conditions would require for me to non-include this person or exclude the individual from the study? So all of that is done in the section of data collection, sampling, known as sampling of the population, okay? This step also includes obtaining authorization, okay? So this is especially when you have to work with animals or with human subject, okay? You have to obtain something like an ethical clearance or an ethical authorization. That means you have to submit your project to an ethical committee. They will evaluate it and see that it does not have great risk to the human population, and then they will give you an ethical clearance to tell you you can go on with your study, okay? You might have to carry out the study in a particular laboratory, and therefore you will also need administrative authorization from that laboratory. At times, depending on the country, you will also need authorization from some ministries such as the Ministry of Health or any other ministry, authorization from such ministries in order to carry out your research. Like in Cameroon, you need the DROS, which is an authorization from the Ministry of Health. Okay, so after obtaining your ethical clearance, obtaining authorization from the institution where you have to carry out your research, you also need an authorization from the Cameroonian Ministry of Health in order to carry out research on humans. Okay, now this stage involves gathering information. Okay, this stage involve gathering information by observing, by asking questions to through questionnaires, okay, and doing experiments. Okay, so all of that falls under collecting your data. So after you should have collected data, you have to analyze and interpret the data. Okay, this is generally done using statistical methods, okay, and tools. And you have different statistical methods and tools that you use. The type of tool or statistical tool or method that you use to analyze your data will depend on the type of data that you have, whether it is normally distributed or it is not normally distributed, whether it is qualitative or it is quantitative data. Okay, an example of such statistical methods, we have the chi-square test, we have the student t-test, we have the Pearson correlation test, we have the receiver operating characteristic curves. Okay, we have the analysis of variance, that is ANOVA, and many other statistical methods that we can use in analyzing our data. Data could now, to simplify the presentation of your data, okay, to your audience, to make it more simpler. At times you might have to use different methods in doing that, and you can represent those data on tables. Okay, you can use figures, you can use images or pictures, okay, to represent your data. In data interpretation, you have to explain what you think, okay, the data is the way it is. Okay, so here we said analyzing and interpreting data, but in a larger sense I would prefer to use analyzing and discussing data, not interpreting, because interpreting data, you just try to explain what you think the data is. Okay, but when you are discussing data, you try to explain what you think the data is, okay, and then you link it to previous studies which might support that what you are saying could possibly be true. Okay, so in most papers, in most projects, in most articles, it will be difficult for you to see interpreting data. You will see discussing. You will see results and discussing, not results and interpretation of data, okay? Because interpreting data will just mean you are explaining what you think the data is. But discussing data actually means you explain what you think the data is the way it is, and you then link it to previous studies, okay, by citing an author or other authors who had worked on this, okay, and referencing them in the reference area. Okay, so interpretation is a subset of discussion. Okay, so we will say analyzing instead of saying analyzing and interpreting data. It is preferably to say analyzing and discussing data, because in most papers you will not just interpret the data, but you will discuss the data. You will say what the data is, what you think the data is the way it is, and you link it to previous studies to actually support what you are saying. And after you should have interpreted or discussed your data, analyzed and discussed your data, you have to draw your conclusions. Okay? Now, after all of that, you will have to evaluate and report your research. In order to do this, you will have to choose the audience. Okay? You have to choose the audience to whom you have to present the report. Okay? And now in reporting your research, there is usually some ordered steps that you have to follow. Okay, so you have to report it in the right format. Have to report it in the right format. Okay, and generally the format is that we report research is you have to start with your introduction, you have to follow with a literature review, after that material and methods, after that results and discussions, after that you have your conclusions, perspectives, and references and appendix. Appendix are those information that you think may be important but you did not have a space in your project document to put them, so you actually extract some of those information and put them in the appendix. Okay, and after you should have done that, you disseminate and publish your findings in a journal. Okay, so you should not do research work that will remain in the cupboard. So after that, you should try, okay, to publish those findings in a journal. And now how you publish will depend on the type of journal. Each journal, they have their particularities, they have their information, they have what you need to do, they have their own style of how you will have to present your information, okay, before you submit to such data. Some are open access, some they will have to tax, but don't have to tax but the researcher. Okay, when they tax the researcher to pay the article, then those who have to those who will have to read, the audience that will have to read the paper will not pay anything again. So they just have to download it and read. On other basis, they might allow the author or the researcher to publish the article free. Then on the other hand, they will have to tax but the audience, okay, those who will have to read the information. So these are the people that they will instead have to tax to pay. So in this other case, it will not be open access. So they can just publish your abstract, and any person who wants to get a detail and read the entire paper will have to buy it. Okay. Now, another important part of research methodology is ethical principles or ethical consideration. Okay. So you have to consider the ethical principles when you are doing research methodology. The first thing is that you should not practice plagiarism. Okay, what do we mean by plagiarism? It means you copy somebody's idea without giving credit to the person. Okay, you go and copy somebody's idea, you come and put in your work, and you do not cite the person. You do not cite the person, you do not reference the person. That is plagiarism. Okay, you should give credit to the author when you copy the author's idea. Okay, you should not put it as if you are the author of that idea. Okay, and there are many journals and articles that will actually do a plagiarism check to see whether the information that you have, and depending on the percentage of plagiarism, if it goes above a certain percent, those journals will refuse to publish your article that you have copied a lot of information from people without giving credit to them. Okay, so you also have to obtain, okay, you have to obtain an ethical clearance if you are working on animals or human subject. Okay, so you have to submit your project and then to an ethical committee. They evaluate the risk that is involved. If they see that it is not very risky, the risks are very mild on humans or animals, then they will give you an ethical clearance, okay, to tell you that, okay, you can go ahead with your research. Okay, you should be honest. You should be honest in collecting and reporting your research data. Ensure that participation is voluntary. So before you enroll any subject into your study, you should actually make that subject know that participation is voluntary, that he or she can step out if he or she feels uncomfortable at any stage of the procedure. Okay, it should not be as if it is a force for them to be enrolled into the subject. You should make them know that enrollment into the study is voluntary. Okay, and you should make them know the advantages and the mild risk that may involve in the study. And you should also tell them the precaution or the preventive measures that you have taken to minimize the risk that may be involved in the study. Okay, so respect confidentiality of subject. Okay, you should not take the information that subjects have given you in the study and then make it a public thing and make it known to the public. Okay, that will be unethical. That will be unethical. Okay, so that is why even in research methodologies, you are always advised to codify your samples. Okay, so instead of using people's name in your analysis, you should codify them. You should give each subject a code, so that instead of using names, okay, you should use codes, so that the information will remain confidential. So when you recruit individuals with their names, you codify them and use the codified samples and not people's names in your analysis. Okay, there should be no bias in population sampling. So when enrolling your subject, there should be no bias. Okay, for instance, do not select a population based on the fact that they are weak and have no say. Okay, you should not do such a bias in your population sampling. It's not because you are a black that you should develop a sample and think that you will only test them on white people. Okay, that means that there is a bias in your idea. Okay, so it's not because you are a white that you should develop your vaccine and think that you only have to test it on black people. Okay, so you should do a random sampling in your population sampling. Okay, so you should not have a bias. When you do that, it is unethical. Okay, do not falsify or force research results. Okay, you should have integrity. This is very important. You should have integrity. You should not falsify or force a research result. Most students usually do this, okay, because they have done literature review and they have seen that past studies by other authors follows a particular trend. Might be the trend to the right, and they have their own result. They will try to force it so that it also move to the right trend, okay, to respect other previous studies. But that is very wrong. You should allow your results the way they are. Okay, allow them the way they are. What you should instead do is to try to look for justifications to justify why your results are the way they are, rather than trying to force it and falsify it to look like that of previous studies. What will happen if you are trying to make it to look like that of previous authors, and meanwhile those previous authors, they also falsified their own result? Okay, your result might instead be the rightful one. Okay, so you should not try to falsify your result. Okay, the best approach is to look for justification why your results are that way. It might be some experimental modification that might have caused your result to have those adjustments. It might be climatic changes. Okay, it might be due to geographical differences. Okay, so you should explain all of that and try to look at why your results look the way they are. Okay, you should not try to force them to look like that of previous studies. Maintain your results the way they are and justify why they look the way they are. Okay, so you should have integrity. Okay, so in summary, we will say research methodology is the search for answers through systematically collecting, analyzing, and interpreting data. Okay, research methodology can be realized either through a quantitative or a qualitative approach. Research methodology is systematic and follows a number of steps. Okay, and finally, research methodology must follow ethical principles. Okay, so that is all I had for you as a beginner in the field of research methodology. Please remember to subscribe and or click on the subscribe button below so that you can be linked to this channel, so that when I upload other interesting lectures on other topics, you should be notified on this publication. Okay, so you all have a nice day and remain blessed.